Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. On behalf of Food IQ Global, I'm grateful that you are joining us for our webinar on evolving perspectives in nutrition. Is it time for a refresh on 100% juice? I don't think it is controversial to say that in the nutrition community, juice can be controversial, with a range of opinions around its position in healthy eating guidance and policy. But today, regardless of your pre-existing opinions, I do thank you for joining us, and I encourage you to keep an open mind and to join us on this journey through current perspectives and current data. I'd like to introduce myself first. I am Dr. Emma Beckett. I am from Food IQ Global, and I'm a food and nutrition scientist. I'll be your facilitator today. This event is funded by Hort Innovation using the Citrus Research Funds and Development Levies and contributions from the Australian Government. Hort Innovation is the grower-owned not-for-profit research and development corporation for Australian horticulture. I'd like to pause and just take a moment to acknowledge that I am joining today from Awabakal lands, and I pay my respects to the traditional owners of these lands, their elders past and present. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I urge you to take a moment to consider the lands that you're joining from today. A little bit of housekeeping. So after the event, we will send you the slides and the resources will be accessible as well. This event will be recorded and the recording will be shared after the event. And hello to everyone who is catching up on YouTube after the event. We will be using the Q&A box for questions today. We'll have questions following all three speakers. We'll do questions together. Please pop your questions into the Q&A box at any time, and you should also be able to upvote questions if someone's already asked something that you would like to see answered. So today we have three wonderful speakers on this topic of evolving perspectives in nutrition and 100% juice. We'll have Dr. Anneline Padayachee talking to us about the science of nutrition. Nicole Senior, accredited practicing dietitian, will be taking us from science into practice. And Tim Cassettari, accredited practicing dietitian, will be sharing some of the latest research data on the links between 100% juice and health. And I will say these are three of my favorite humans that we have speaking for you today, so you're in for an absolute treat. Before we hear from our speakers, though, I would love to hear from you, those who are online with us now. So we have two polls that we would like to take you through, and the first poll should be appearing for you now. So the first question is, do you recommend 100% juice? Whether that's to your clients, patients, or generally when speaking about nutrition. So the answer one is yes, as a regular choice. Answer two is yes, but only occasionally. Answer three is no, but I don't actively discourage it. Or four, no, I do actively discourage it. If you could answer that poll for us now. And we have our results in. So the most common answer is I recommend juice, but only occasionally, with 48%, followed by no, but not discouraging it. And the actively discouraging is the smallest percentage. So that's very interesting to know. We do have one more question we'd like to ask you before we move forward, and hopefully we can reflect on these answers as we move through. The next question is, how often do you drink juice? Daily, weekly, rarely, or never? And just pick the closest option if there isn't one that directly reflects how regularly you drink juice. Daily, weekly, rarely, or never? And the answers are in. Ooh, the most common is rarely, followed by weekly, daily, and then never. So rarely is above half of you, which very interesting to me. And we'll see how you all feel about that at the end of the presentations today. So we do have our first presentation now, and it is my absolute joy to introduce Dr. Anneline Padayachee. I do alternate between Anneline and Anneline because of who I am as a person, and she is so gracious to allow me to do that. You might know her as Dr. Anneline, or you might know her as the Food and Nutrition Doctor with a capital T and a capital everything, really. Anneline is a PhD qualified food and nutrition scientist who is well known for her ability to connect dots and turn complexity into simplicity. She is one of the smartest and kindest humans that I know, and we are absolutely thrilled to have her here to speak today. Take it away, Dr. Anneline.
Thanks, Emma. And you know what? My mom and dad don't actually have a consensus on my name. So mom calls me Anneline and my dad calls me Anneline. So I'm pretty easygoing either way. So today we're going to explore the science of nutrition. And, you know, the science of nutrition is not actually as straightforward or as simple and as black and white as we would like it to think that it is. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a bit of historical context. Firstly, we're going to look at the historical evolution of the food supply, and then the historical evolution of nutrition science, and how we are currently entering into food system 4.0, which is entirely a nutrition food system. It's very nutrition centric and health motivated. So let's go. All right, now we got to go back in time, start way back right at the start of it all. And you got to realize, where did we come from? So first diets that we have archaeologically is based on that hunter-gatherer style diet where, you know, people are very nomadic. They travel to different regions following the seasons, hunting, gathering, those sort of things. Roughly around 6000 BC, the Fertile Crescent really comes into play, and we see a rise in population groups that were planting crops on the banks of different rivers. And by doing that, they didn't need to travel around as much. They didn't need to be nomadic. That gave rise to villages, gave rise to towns, gave rise to cities. So ancient Egyptians are really the birthplace of ancient agriculture. And then we move into the 1500s and the explorers turn up and they start traveling the world looking for spices, cocoa, all different types of ingredients in their quests. And so now we've got population routes that are transferring different ingredients across the world. Enter the 1800s and the Industrial Revolution turns up. And so, yes, now we're starting to see a bit more automation and processing taking place. Things like this, you know, equipment that's used in agriculture actually started way back then. At the same time, Louis Pasteur, he was discovering microbes, and his discovery of microbes was happening, which led to the rise of pasteurization and retorting, technologies that could be used to make food safe. Now, whilst he's doing that, we have a couple of other scientists discovering elements of the periodic table. And these two, Fourcroy and Berzelius, are kind of the godfathers of nutrition because they're the ones who found the components, the elements that were in amino acids, that were in proteins, that were in vitamins. And that was kind of the birthplace of nutrition. Now, whilst this is all happening, we've got wars taking place, mass food insecurity. President Hoover actually said, I'll promise a chicken in a pot for everybody. The Great Depression is happening. And finally, the 1950s hits us. And for the first time in a very long time, we've got food security. Women can enter the workplace. I mean, if KFC started at any other time in history, probably wouldn't have been successful because he was literally trying to provide a service for women. Automation that was in the car industry started entering the food supply. And so now we're able to produce a lot of food to feed the masses relatively cheaply. And so there's this huge focus on food safety, because now we're seeing a rise in different types of pathological bacteria in the food industry. And that literally has been the focus since about the 1950s up until now. And it still is. Safe food, safe food, safe food, safe food. HACCP is all about food safety. So that is the evolution of the food supply, how our food supply has got to where it has got, and our reliance on the food industry. But here's the thing, we eat food, not nutrients, but food is our primary source of nutrition. So like back in the 1800s, when those guys were discovering amino acids, nutrition as a science had its own department. You could go to university and study physiology, astronomy, chemistry, and you could literally, there was a department just for nutrition in terms of its science. And it kind of peaked around about the 1850s. Now, yes, we know Anyone who works in nutrition would know that food provides us with all of these macronutrients. But for those who may be from the food industry, so we're all singing off the same song sheet. A macronutrient is anything we need in more than 1 gram in the human body. It is what provides us with energy. Micronutrients is what we need in less than 1 gram, micro, teeny tiny. So our vitamins and our minerals. And then we've got things that are considered non-nutrients like fiber, water, bioactives, phytonutrients, antioxidants that play a very important role in different things, different systems in our body, right? Now, this is really, really important. And if this is the only thing you leave with, then I think I've done my job. Nutrition is not the concept of a single food or a single nutrient. Nutrition comes from the sum total of food we eat over time, and nutrition-related health outcomes stems from a combination of foods due to their different nutritional qualities that we consume. So right now, I think the biggest trend we're seeing in the food industry is protein, protein, protein. And we got to realize, and so I have this conversation with the food industry that yes, protein is important, but it is not the only thing we consume. So we've got to keep that in mind. What is the role of this food product? What is the role of this nutritional component, whether that be lettuce and tomatoes, orange juice, or steak? What is its role in that diet? Now, in terms of nutrition evolution, all right, so we've seen where we came from, how our food supply evolved, how the food industry kind of came to be, and it was really trying to fit a niche area about feeding people because we've had all of these wars and the Great Depression and not enough money, lots and lots of malnutrition. How can we actually address this? At the same time, nutrition as a science was really peaking around the 1950s, 1920s, when we discovered the nutrients and we also discovered specific deficiency issues like iron deficiency anemia, vitamin C, scurvy, calcium osteoporosis. Protein energy malnutrition. So this focus on nutrients moving to its role in treating deficiencies became the real focus around the 1920s, 1950s. Now you got to realize at the same time, we've come out all these wars. We've got this new food system, this processed food industry that has now got automation in it. So we're able to produce a lot of food relatively cheaply. Nutrition in terms of its components in food was still, that dot had not yet been joined. And so now we start seeing a rise in the 1960s onwards in chronic health conditions, fats, sugar, salt, which led to dietary recommendations based on nutrients. See the whole, if you look at Time magazine, at different decades, it's eat fat, don't eat fat, eat fat, don't eat fat. Right now, it's eat sugar, don't eat sugar, eat sugar, don't eat sugar. So it's like every 10 years, there's this evolution. And then we've got into the 2000s, which is looking more at population health, gut health, our genetics and genotypes and omic technologies and how that really is starting to play. So we're building upon all of this knowledge, having a better understanding of human physiology, food components, and coming up with dietary guidelines based on the food groups. And then obviously, yes, I forgot about the food dietary patterns in the early 2000s. Now, that leads us to where we currently are, which is 2020 onwards. And the real focus, whilst we will still be looking at all of these other aspects of nutrition, there is a growing focus in understanding the mechanism of action in foods, individualized or personalized nutrition, and understanding agri-food nutrition systems. So mechanisms of action means it's not good enough to say that there is protein in milk. Can you tell me, how does that whey protein get absorbed in the digestive tract of a newborn or an 85-year-old with sarcopenia? What is that mechanism of action? And can we do that in other food products? So, and then we've got the agri-food nutrition system, which is where nutrition is moving across from agriculture and primary processing, understanding how nutrition starts off on farm, moving through food processing. So technologies that can enhance the nutritional composition, that can enhance digestibility, and actually moving on to human health and the impact it has on health. So trying to actually go across that entire stream. That's where we're heading. Be cool if we were there now, right? that's where we are heading. And the reason for that is, if you look at, there's a lot of new papers that are actually coming out, and the research is showing how the reductionist approach, yes, we do need to look at those individual amino acids and different nutrients. We do need to understand nutrient bioavailability requirements and how that impacts on health. But you cannot get away from the fact that food is the life source for everyone, but it is also one of our biggest impacts on the environment that we live in, whether that's in Australia or in the Sudan. If you're talking about environmental issues, you will be affecting nutrition and food. If you talk about food and nutrition, you're affecting the environment. So it just kind of has to actually work together. So I will give Emma a copy of this paper, so you can actually see it. It's a great paper, and it shows you, it's really quite encapsulates the different types of processing technologies along the way: hydrogenation of oil, spray drying, freeze drying, ready to eat meals, and what was actually happening in terms of technology at the time, and simultaneously what was happening in the health and nutrition world. But it was very much so, it shows how siloed our approach has been up until this point. Now we're trying to be a bit more integrated and work together so that we stop having these negative health outcomes, or decreasing the prevalence of these negative health outcomes. So that brings me to Food System 4.0. Now, Food System 4.0 is all about health innovation. So it's important for anyone who works in the food industry to have a nutrition strategy. So we've got diversity strategies, we've got environmental strategies, we've got sustainability strategies. Nutrition strategy is part of that. So whether you make marshmallows, or you make plant-based burger patties, or you make baby formula, what is the role of your product in terms of its nutritional contribution to the diet? It needs to be inclusive. So inclusive means not just a diverse range of people working in the industry, but what we apply here in Australia, in a developed nation, can that be applied in Malaysia or Bangladesh or somewhere in Africa? Keeps the earth in mind. So that sustainability, environmental impact component is part of it, and is resilient. And COVID taught us that in a big way. Our reliance on staples, meats, flour, porridge, all those things that are traditional foods from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, how we just gravitated towards it because it is what is considered to be safe and everybody knows it. So is it resilient to fluctuations in global trade issues and other problems that could potentially turn up in the world? Right now we've got, geopolitics and wars happening. How resilient is the food system to that? So really important, needs to have all those four components. Okay, why is my computer not moving? Oh, there we go. All right, so if you're going to talk about nutrition in the food industry, we have to bring Nova into it, of course. So Nova is, you've got your different levels of processing, and Nova is, from a purist perspective, is based on, more unprocessed equals more unhealthy, less processed means more healthy. And so it's almost very simplistic if you think about it from that perspective, because processing is literally just a technology. It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. It's the formulations that need to be upgraded. So in terms of, your 100% juices, they actually fall into the minimally processed category versus your snacks and your chips that are your ultra processed type products. Now, why has nutrition and health messaging had such a bad slack in the food industry? And I mean, it doesn't help that we do have these crazy claims that come out from time to time, the juices. And this is actually real health claims that have been found on different types of products in the juice world in the USA. Not so much in Australia, but in the USA, which is kind of crazy that they've allowed it to slide through. So it's really important to start thinking about it for the food industry: product features, health claims versus what is the actual dietary benefits. There is a distinct difference. The role of this product in the diet and its impact on health can be completely different to the apparent marketing health claims that are being made. Now, here's an example of some really ultra, mega ultra processed products. So infant formula, this is a product that I actually worked on, Alula Gold. Trisco puts out a range of different products, particularly thickened juices that are nutritionally fortified and developed for patients with dysphagia. This is some 3D printed food, and this is examples of 3D printed foods in the Netherlands in old age homes that have been nutritionally formulated for the individual's needs. So it's easy for them to swallow, but meets their needs. And just last week, or 2 weeks ago, CSIRO launched some protein powder that's extracted from meat byproduct waste at Beef Week that can be used in nutritional food products. So yeah, it is important that, you know, health claims are not just marketing spiel, but there is actually evidence behind it. So wrapping it up, right on time. Food System 4.0, there's a lot to it, but essentially processing can reduce or improve nutrient content. Processing can value add from byproducts, reducing weight. And so it has an important role both in nutrition, but also in that sustainable and environmental impact. So the questions that I always ask people in the food industry: what is its dietary benefit? What's its purpose? What's its nutritional composition? What is its dose that people need to actually take to get the benefit, impact on waste, and how accessible is it to everyone? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anneline. Life is amazing. You are amazing. That was amazing. I feel like that was possibly a year of my food science degree crammed into 10 minutes. I hope everyone enjoyed that as much as I did. So now we have another set of questions for you, and I will remind you, as well as answering our questions, we would like to answer yours. So do use that Q&A feature for all of the speakers, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the webinar. So our next poll question is, 100% juice, should it be in the guidelines a core food, a discretionary food, or something else completely different? Pick other. 3 options. Let us know. And the results are in the majority, the largest amount, 41% say that juice should be a discretionary food, with only 31% saying core food. And I'm very glad we included other, because we've got 28% sitting in that category right now. And again, I invite you to reflect on this at the end of the webinar. Our next poll question is coming up now. And a simple true or false. Juice, 100% juice is a major contributor to the serves of fruit consumed in the Australian diet. So do you believe that to be a true or a false statement? 100% juice is a major contributor to the serves of fruit consumed in the Australian diet. And the majority do say true, which is very interesting for me, reflecting on how this matches up with your other answers in the polls so far. So 83% have got that one with true. So we will continue to reflect on those, and I will now introduce you to your next speaker today. So Nicole Senior, who is an accredited practicing dietitian, is joining us today, and she is a dietitian, nutritionist, consultant, author, speaker, and a food and health enthusiast. She has decades of experience in doing all of these things, and she has an incredible skill that she refers to as the gift of the gab, but I refer to as being spectacularly able to bridge the gap between science and practice and communicate that with people. She has an incredible way of helping people access information. I've seen her speak many times before. This is my first time having the joy of introducing her. Nicole is joining us today on audio only, because we are having some difficulty with her camera settings. So look at this beautiful face now. You're missing out on seeing this as she presents, but she will do a fabulous job regardless. Nicole, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you for that very kind introduction, Emma, and right back at you. I would like to say that I'm joining you today from the land of the Barramatagal clan of the Darug Nation, now known as Parramatta. Now, I would like to declare that I have, in my capacity as a freelance dietitian, been paid to do research and writing for both Hort Innovation about citrus and the Sugar Nutrition Resource Centre about sugar, carbohydrates and health. So today we're going to be talking about the challenge of translating nutrition science into dietary guidance. And in my talk today, I'm going to be talking about dietary guidelines, and then I'm going to be sharing what I consider the gaps or the traps, things that I'd like you to be aware of when you yourself are translating nutrition science into dietary guidance. And I've used the well-worn railroad trope of mind the gap. And then at the end, we'll just wrap it up and summarize. So dietary guidelines, they are a public health tool. They help us to all meet our nutrient needs. They promote our health and well-being, and they reduce population disease risk. Now, they do this by focusing on dietary patterns, especially nowadays in food-based dietary guidelines. Everybody's moving towards food-based dietary guidelines, although I do note that our guidelines are kind of a hybrid at the moment, a little bit of food-based, a little bit of nutrient-based, but they do emphasize a dietary pattern, not eat this and avoid that. So the dietary guidelines are for all healthy Australians, including those with common health conditions such as overweight, but they're not for frail elderly, infants, or people on special diets for medical conditions, and that's where dietitians come in. Now, there's a tortoise at the bottom of this slide, and that's because I think it's been a bit too slow since we reviewed our dietary guidelines. Our last ones were in 2013. And our ones that are currently under review won't be ready till 2027, and that's too far between drinks in my opinion, but that's the way it goes. So what do the dietary guidelines say about 100% juice? Well, they say that 100% juice with no added sugar is a core food, and it's part of the fruit group. Although I note that they say a serve is 125 mils, which is quite a small amount. And interestingly, the kilojoule content of 125 mils of fruit juice with no added sugar is actually significantly less, sometimes half, than the kilojoule content of the whole fruit, which is an equivalent fruit serve. So that's interesting. Not sure why that's the case. The dietary guidelines also tell us that fruit juices are acidic and that we need to be aware of dental erosion. Now, I know Tim's going to talk a little bit about this, but spoiler alert, it's not as bad as you might think. The guidelines also tell us that juices have lost the dietary fibre found in fresh fruit. And for the most part, I think that's true, although there still is a bit of fibre in juice. But nowadays, you do find in our food supply juices with some or all of the fibre retained, especially in the NutriBullet age that we find ourselves in, where everyone loves a smoothie and you just chuck in the whole fruit. So let's have a look at the international dietary guidelines about juice. What do they say? Well, I think comparable countries such as Canada, New Zealand, USA, France, and the UK, and indeed the WHO, I guess are quite consistent in that they talk a lot about sugar and they talk a lot about limiting intake because of that sugar. I note in the USA, they say that we need to limit intake because of caloric density. And I just want to interrogate that a little bit. Now, in fact, fruit juices are not energy dense because they're 90% water. And when you increase the water in a food, it lowers the food's energy density. And you'll see I'll put a little table there that compares the energy density of juice versus the whole fruit. And you'll see that they're actually lower. So that's interesting. And I think really we're moving away from energy density. It's a bit of a crude indicator, and it does penalise foods such as healthy fats, and it doesn't pay any attention to nutrient density. So I think we're kind of moving away from that identifier. So the latest international dietary guidelines that are creating discussions around the world are the Nordic nutrition recommendations. They only came out last year, and they really set the path for us in terms of wanting dietary guidelines that are good for both our health and the environment. And they have said that low to moderate intake of fruit juice may be part of a healthy diet, and that there's not enough evidence to make a quantitative recommendation or limit for health. They also say that climate impact is generally low. But of course, opinion often differs from dietary guidelines. We don't have the cut through with dietary guidelines that perhaps we'd like. There is a disconnect, and this, of course, creates confusion in the public. I mean, we've got Sarah Wilson, the I Quit Sugar woman here, talking about you don't need fructose, and that includes fruit and honey. That's quite an absolute statement. And I'll just let you know that Australians don't have an excess intake of fructose, and the only harm fructose causes is when you have it to great excess. So, yeah, a doctor says, well, it's just not nutritionally necessary. Well, I guess that could be said for a lot of foods, but we still enjoy them. Food is more than nutrients. And of course, the George Institute equating juices with soft drinks, which I'm not sure is entirely accurate or helpful. So here's the first gap that I'd like you to mind: the gap between evidence, rhetoric, and blame. So unfortunately, juices have been affected by the anti-sugar movement. We know that in the battle with obesity, juices have been thrown in with sweetened drinks, and sometimes even in research. Some people have called them worse than fizzy drinks, and natural sugars just as bad as added. And of course, that's not helped by the WHO, which now includes juices as part of their free sugars definition. Now, this might have had good intentions, this WHO definition, but I think it's had some unintended consequences. So I think that sugar in fruit juice concentrates was originally the target for this new definition, because fruit juice concentrates have been used in food processing as a kind of more natural alternative to regular sugar. And US and Brazil and China pump out huge amounts of these fruit juice concentrates for food processing purposes. And I think in an effort to reduce their use, fruit juices kind of just got lumped in. They were cast in the same net, and I'm not really sure that that's fair. So food is more than just nutrients, and juice is more than just the sugar, in the same way that avocado, nuts, and oils are more than just fats, and whole grains are more than just carbohydrates. I think we have to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Another gap to mind is how to place global guidelines or science in context. So in Australia, this juice story is not bad at all. Fruit juice is mostly consumed with meals. It does actually help people achieve the dietary fruit intake recommendations, especially children. Not everyone drinks juice, and I mean, the poll earlier suggested that was true in this group too. And for those people who do drink juice, juices are not contributing a significant amount of sugars or energy. Single issue nutrition is a bit of a pet peeve of mine, and I think we have to really keep in mind the whole diet. So single issue nutrition, or SIN, is when you focus on one thing at the cost of everything else. And I think really this has not delivered on the promise of health benefit that we hoped, and it's had a lot of costs, a lot of unintended consequences. About the only people that have benefited from SIN are manufacturers of highly processed foods that can use these claims. We have to be careful that, especially in busy households, disadvantaged families, that fresh fruit and veg are difficult. And we have to acknowledge that 100% fruit juices are minimally processed, nutrient-dense foods. We also, in this cost of living crisis, need to recognise that fruit juices have the highest nutrient density to cost ratio, and whole fruit does not. So fruit juices are a nutritious, low-cost foods. And I think we could do with being a bit more pragmatic. Fruit juice is definitely, absolutely healthier than soft drinks. It is absolutely better and healthier than alcohol, and absolutely better than no fruit. I think we need to take care that we're not villainising foods and harming our relationship with food and underplaying enjoyment and pleasure. Also, we have to be mindful that we're delivering advice within a larger food context. So we have fabulous Australian fruit growers who deserve a good living. I encourage you to drink local juice and buy Australian, and remember that juicing is a good way to sell lower quality fruit, which is good for farmers and reduces waste. So please, if I can get you to walk away with some key messages today, remember that science needs to be individualised and contextualised. We need to embrace food complexity, avoid sin, single issue nutrition, and villainising food. Be positive, realistic, and pragmatic, and remember we're part of a broader food system. Thank you.
Nicole, thank you. That was wonderful. And there we go. I'm glad you did put that photo in at the end now, so everyone does get to see you. Key take homes for me, I will remember that single issue nutrition is a sin, and highlighting that gap between good intentions and potentially harmful consequences, that really resonates with me as a message for this topic and generally. So thank you so much, Nicole. Remember, we will have Nicole in the Q&A at the end of the session. So please do pop any questions you have into the Q&A box and we will come to those shortly. I again have another question for you all. We've got two last questions before our final presentation. So this poll asks you, what do you think the relationship is between 100% juice and weight? So do you believe there is a high level of evidence that it causes weight gain? Do you believe that there is a high level of evidence for a neutral effect on weight? Or do you believe that there is no high level evidence to say if 100% juice is associated, and that definitely should say weight. So imagine that says weight there and no link to weight. Okay, and the results are in. So despite my typo, most of you have said no high level evidence for an association between weight and tooth health, 56% of you. So we have one more poll, and this one is about tooth health, and we did have a little bit of a spoiler from Nicole, but that's okay. So our next question is, how is 100% juice related to tooth health? Hard for me to say, a girl with a lisp. First option, high level evidence that it causes damage. Second option, high level evidence of overall neutral effect. Or the final option is no high level evidence to say that it's associated. Results are in. No high level evidence is the number one answer, 63%. So good. I think that means you were listening when Nicole was speaking and her message was getting through. And Tim will have a bit more detail coming up on that in the next presentation, I believe. And so it now is my joy to present my colleague, Tim Cassettari from Food IQ Global for our final presentation today. Tim's qualifications span nutrition, exercise science, psychology, and dietetics, and he is an accredited practicing dietitian. Tim's diverse skill set is why we call him our foodie translator, because he is not just a top quality nutrition researcher, but he is also a spectacular storyteller. He uses these skills every day to help make the world a better place through food. It's a joy to see him do it. It's a joy to see him here doing it today. So it's my pleasure to hand over to Tim to take us through the latest evidence on 100% juice and health. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you so much, Emma. I appreciate the introduction and great to have the privilege to speak to everyone today about the latest evidence of juice. I actually want to start with the story, and that story begins just after I'd graduated from university as a dietitian, so quite some time ago now. But I finally got a job, and I got the money to move out of home, and I moved in with one of my best friends as flatmates. And not too long after we had started living together, it was a hot summer's day. My flatmate was in the kitchen and he opened the fridge door, got out a jug of juice, got a glass, poured it into the glass, took a sip, and then he turned to me and he said, "Tim, what's your thoughts on juice?" And I was sitting there on the table reading a book. I looked up at him with a very discerning look, very serious face. And what I said to his question was, fruit juice is not a healthy option. And this advice, this recommendation has been what I've held throughout my whole entire dietetic career up until about 2 years ago when I started actually researching the health effects of fruit juice. And I'm excited to say that I've spent most of the last 2 years thinking about juice and health, and excited to share with you all today the latest evidence. So the paper that I'll be taking you through is this one here, which is an umbrella review on the health effects of drinking 100% juice. But I wanted to make two acknowledgements before I get into the data. So the first acknowledgement is I've been reading recently about this effect called the Matilda effect. And if you haven't heard about it, it's not actually about the Australian women's football team. It is about this phenomenon we see in science where men often get the credit of the contribution and ideas of women. And so I wanted to not contribute to that phenomenon in any way and acknowledge that this piece of work has been done by a team of wonderful women that I'm just one part of, and wanted to acknowledge all of their work, and everything here today is the result of their ideas and contributions. And the second thing I wanted to acknowledge is that this paper, as you can see there, was funded by AusVeg and Hort Innovation. So we're very appreciative of their funding, and we also take industry funding very seriously to reduce risk of bias. So what we do when we work with food industry partners is we make an agreement up front to publish the work irrespective of results. We carry out all of the research independently ourselves. We publish the methodology up front before we go into the work. And we also publish the data in an open access journal. So anyone can review, look at, analyze, and publish more research on the data themselves. So you may have seen that the title was an umbrella review. Some of you may not know what umbrella review is. So I wanted to take you through what it is and why. So I'm sure you've all heard of literature reviews or systematic literature reviews, where we review individual studies, compile them together in a systematic way to answer a particular research question. And systematic reviews are a really useful tool to help guide public health policy and make decisions. But what we're noticing is that we may get some conflicting results across different systematic reviews. So you may do a systematic review on a particular food and weight, and maybe you'll see an adverse outcome perhaps. Or you may see a systematic review on heart health and see a protective association perhaps. So what we do is, in order to understand the overall balance of the evidence, an umbrella review or a review of reviews is able to help see that wider picture and assess the overall balance of evidence to help inform decision-making and public. Another key important element in an umbrella review is it recognizes that not all evidence is equal, and it considers not just the overall evidence, but also the quality of that evidence. And the tool that we use in our umbrella review to rate the quality of evidence, the same tool that's being used in the Dietary Guidelines update, is GRADE. So if you haven't heard of GRADE before, essentially GRADE looks at the type of evidence, so whether it's an intervention or observational study, But it doesn't just do the traditional method that says, well, an RCT is high quality and observational is low quality. It actually recognizes that we can have observational studies that's really well done and high quality, and we can have RCT evidence that has limitations and issues and bias as well. So it looked at all these other factors within those studies to assess the overall certainty of evidence. And it rates evidence on 4 levels: A for high, B for medium, C for low, or D for very low. And so an umbrella review is able to look at the overall balance of evidence across health outcomes, but it's also able to look at the quality of evidence and the confidence we have in those studies. So what did we find in an umbrella review? So I'll take you through the top line results now. So in terms of the methodology, we focused on and included systematic literature reviews with meta-analysis on 100% juice and any health outcomes. The way we defined 100% juice is it could be direct from the fruit or vegetable, so not from concentrate, or it could be reconstituted. So that's where the water is taken out and added back in. But importantly, it can't have any added sugars, sweeteners, or fortification. If it did, we didn't count it as 100% juice. And we rated the evidence using grade, and risk of bias is a tool used to help inform our overall grade rating. What did we find? So we found 15 systematic literature reviews with 51 primary and 144 total meta-analysis. So what that means is we may see a systematic review that's looking at juice and heart health, and it may look at cholesterol and blood pressure and all these other markers of heart health. And that's why we have more primary meta-analysis than systematic reviews. And within that meta-analysis, they may do sub-analysis by type of juice or dose of juice. And that's why we see more total meta-analysis than primary. So we've got a large body of data on 100% juice and health. Interestingly, though, when we looked at the juices included, all of the studies were 100% fruit juices. So we don't have enough data or any data on vegetable juice that meets at this high level criteria. We definitely need more. And the doses, the range of doses was very large. So it varied from 50 milliliters per day up to 1.2 liters per day. And the overall quality of the data ranged from very low to medium according to the grade. So there was no high level of evidence, but this is very typical in nutrition studies. So just last year, there's an umbrella review published on sugars and health. And again, the evidence varied from very low to medium for that umbrella review as well. So it's very rare that we do find high level evidence in nutrition. Okay, so what was the overall balance of evidence? So I want to zoom in now on the intervention studies that were systematic literature reviews and meta-analysis. And what we found was moderate quality evidence of benefits. So I'll take you through this slide. These are the health outcomes. This is whether they are benefit or risk. This is the grade score, so the quality of the evidence, and this is the overall effect size. So what we found is 2 important things when we looked at intervention studies. The first is there was benefit up to moderate quality evidence of improvement in a range of different cardiovascular and inflammatory markers, so lowering in inflammatory markers. These studies are quite significant. So some of these were 25 plus RCTs and systematic reviews and meta-analysis of those. The effect sizes were clinically meaningful for the cardioprotective ones. It's more difficult to determine what a meaningful reduction in inflammation is. And this evidence is the strongest we had. So of all the things we can say about juice, these effects are the strongest. The other key thing is that there was no evidence of risk in any intervention systematic review with meta-analysis. There was a number of outcomes looking at intervention studies with no effect. These are listed here and ordered by the quality of the data. A few things to keep in mind. You can see here there was no effect on markers of liver health. There was no effect on markers of metabolic health. And there was no effect on markers of body weight either. And this is interesting because this is different to what we would expect to see for a sugar-sweetened beverage. So it's saying that there's something happening with 100% juice that's very different to sugar-sweetened beverages. Okay, so now what I want to show you is the data from the observational studies. So these are systematically reviewed the meta-analysis of observational studies, and we found very low quality evidence of both benefit and risk. So here again, we've got the quality of evidence. This is the health outcome, and these are the relative risks. So a few things to keep in mind. So we've got more of a split picture here. So there is some evidence of risk, which we didn't have in the intervention studies. But it's important to note that quality of the evidence was D for all of these outcomes. So if you look at these relative risks, you can see for some it's quite small. This is a 3% increase. This is a 7% increase, for example. You'll also note that the statistical significance for these risks is very marginal. So it's only just statistically significant. And also the number of studies are quite small. So this is a meta-analysis of 2 studies. This is of 3, this is of 4. So it's actually a low quantity of data for most of these outcomes. And this slide presents the health outcomes from observational studies where there was no association, again, ordered by the confidence we had in the data, and just highlighting the BMI in our review, there was no statistical association with BMI in children. So one question you might have, and one key finding from the data, was that there was a discrepancy between observational and intervention studies. And why might this be the case? It's definitely not the only time in nutrition research that we see this. It does happen quite a bit. So it's important to look at the totality of the evidence together and consider all of it together. Some of the issues with observational studies, as we've sort of looked at, is the effect sizes here were very small, so that reduces our confidence in those associations with marginal statistical significance. Some of the outcomes lack clear mechanisms, and there's also the risk of confounding because there's not that control. The other thing to keep in mind is how observational studies are done is that done using food frequency questionnaires, where the people in those studies will report how often they consume 100% juice, and they may not necessarily reporting that accurately. At the same time, observational studies are the gold standard for chronic disease risk in nutrition science, and there's limitations with intervention studies as well. So some of the limitations are that the length of studies are not as long as the observational studies. So in our umbrella review, the longest intervention study was 18 months, but most varied from several weeks to several months. So it's possible that perhaps over a longer period of time, we may start to see some negative outcomes. It's also possible that they're not measuring all of the different mechanisms and that there's some mechanistic ways that juice may be impacting health that's not being measured. And it's also possible that it's not totally reflective of real world intake. So in the umbrella review, there was a lot of data on a lot of juice types, but many of those studies, while there was studies on more common juices, there was a lot of studies on juices like pomegranate juice and grape juice, which are not necessarily reflective of the types of juices that people are consuming most. So we need to consider all of this data in mind. And there's different ways we can reconcile this. So one option could be, well, this observational data is limited, so really there's unlikely to be risk and there's likely to be benefit. Another option could be, well, actually the intervention studies are limited, so perhaps there is risk. But I think it's important to keep in mind that that risk, if it is there, is likely to be small, given it wasn't found in intervention studies and the association was small in observational data. And the other thing I think that's really important to ask is, well, how can we be confident that people are actually reporting 100% juice intake in those food frequency questionnaires that they're using in observational studies? And this question, I started to think about a lot when I had a moment with my current flatmate, actually. I have a few flatmate stories. But as I was doing this research on this paper, I was looking at the data and got quite excited about the health benefits of 100% juice and mentioned that to my flatmate and said, oh, I'm going to start drinking 100% juice. And he was keen to as well. And I said, just make sure, go for the 100% option. And he's like, 100%? And I said, yes, no additives. We're in a bit of a rush, so I didn't really get to explain it in depth. But anyway, he came back, went to the shop, came back, And he said, Tim, I got juice. I got the 100% one. And I said, oh, great. And he showed me the juice that he got. And it was on the pack, there was a bright picture of an orange there, and it said in big writing, no artificial colors, flavors, or preservatives. And then we turned it over and read the ingredients list. And the ingredients list, it wasn't actually a fruit juice, it was a fruit drink with many different additives there, as you can see, a lower concentration of actual fruit juice and added sugar too. And I think this is important because it means when we look at that observational data, how can we be confident that that is reflective of actual 100% juice intake? And the answer, of course, is we can't. So therefore, when we're talking about the health effects of juice, we need to be mindful about how we communicate that data in a way that's scientifically accurate. So we can stand up there and we can say, yes, there's a small association between 100% juice intake and some health outcomes. You can stand up there and say, we may need to be prudent about how we consume 100% juice, or because I think there may be some adverse health effects. But we cannot stand up there and say 100% juice is bad for health. Doing so is incorrect and unscientific if we want to pride ourselves in being evidence-based science translators. Of course, at the time when I was having this discussion with my flatmates, I wasn't across all of the latest data. And I didn't just stop there when I said fruit juice is bad for your health. I said fruit juice is bad for your health because it's not filling and it can damage your teeth. And you may have realized, if you're observant, that there was no dental health or appetite or satiety outcomes in the umbrella review. And that's because of the lack of data on these outcomes. So there actually wasn't data that met our eligibility criteria, which was systematic reviews and meta-analysis of studies, because we were interested in the highest level of evidence. But what we did is we were very interested in, well, what is the science actually saying on these outcomes? So we did an additional literature search to uncover those. So in terms of dental health, there were actually systematic reviews and meta-analysis on juice and dental health, but when we actually looked at the individual studies, we found that the studies were not all 100% juice. So one of the issues in the juice literature is actually being very specific on what 100% juice is and where the studies are actually on 100% juice when they say that they are. But we did come across a 2019 systematic review. So not with meta-analysis, but it did look at 100% juice studies and stuff. And that study had data on children, only observational studies, and it had data on adults, only intervention studies. And the data on children was interesting because there was a reduced association with dental caries in 2 of the 4 cohorts, and there was no association with all 3 of the cohorts. And the authors hypothesized that this reduction in caries may be because the kids that are drinking 100% juice may be having less sugar-sweetened beverages or other beverages that may be have more of an impact on caries risk than 100% juice. In terms of the adults, these findings were interesting as well because there was increased markers in caries and erosion in most of the trials. But what the authors, when you look at these studies, the authors said that most of these studies were done by the same research team. And what this research team did is they got people to sip on 1 cup of 100% juice over a 10-minute period. And they got them to repeat that 3 to 4 times a day. And they compared that to water. And they actually did it in a way that affected their normal saliva excretion. And overall, these authors said of the systematic review, well, that evidence is interesting, but it's not reflective of how we actually would consume juice in the real world. And the existing evidence we have on 100% fruit juice intake and caries and tooth erosion is not conclusive. It's also important to keep in mind that it's easy to say, oh, juice is acidic or juice is sugar, it's bad for dental health. But of course, we're missing the wider context here. So some practical recommendations to keep in mind. All of these affect the relationship between a food and dental health is things like dental hygiene. So making sure there's regular teeth brushing, flossing, and regular dental visits. The time of consumption. So if you have juice with a meal, that can reduce the acidic exposure than having it between meals. Having it with a straw, again, can help reduce the acidity exposure. Drinking some water after you drink juice can help. And making sure you wait 30 minutes after consuming any acidic food or beverage is important, because if you brush your teeth after consuming any acidic food or beverage, as my partner says, he's a dentist, you can wear away your enamel as well. What about appetite? So I find appetite interesting because we often, I mean, it's really more a mechanism than a health outcome. So it's interesting, but what does that actually mean in terms of overall health is an important consideration. But it is something that's often said in the juice discussion. And the data is very limited. So we found very few RCTs, no systematic reviews on juice and satiety. Interestingly, this study is the main study that most people cite when they talk about juice lacking satiety. And this is a study by Barbara Rolls and her team back in 2009. And it's a very interesting study. What they did is they got isoenergetic amounts of whole apple and apple juice with no added sugar, so same calories, got people to consume one or the other, and then they gave them access to a delicious all-you-can-eat buffet, and they recorded how many kilojoules they had in that buffet meal. What they found was that people that had the apple juice ate more kilojoules in the buffet than people that had the whole apple. So from this one study, thinking about apple juice versus whole apple, it suggests that whole apple may be more satiating than apple juice. But a couple of important things to keep in mind that I found interesting reading this study. So the first is that they had another arm that added fiber to the apple juice, and the effects were the same as without fiber apple juice. So it would indicate that this difference is explained by not the lack of fiber in juice or the lesser amount of fiber in juice, but something else. The other thing also is they had another arm that was a control arm, and they weren't given anything. And then but they also got the access to the all-you-can-eat buffet. And they had more kilojoules in that buffet and a similar number of kilojoules overall than the apple juice arm. And that's important because when we talk about apple juice and satiety, I think we tend to say, oh, it's sort of empty calories, it's not filling, and that's not true. That it is, based on this data, it does have a satiating effect. It may be smaller than the whole apple, but there's still a satiating effect compared to having nothing at all. There was also other health outcomes that were not included in the umbrella review that I wanted to point out. So one interesting one was cognitive function. So this is a cohort study of the men's health professional cohort, and it looked at subjective cognitive function decline in older adults and looked at the consumption of various foods and the association of those foods with cognitive decline. And one of the interesting findings that these authors found was that juice is actually associated with a significant risk reduction. But what's more, when they did sub-analysis of that data, they found that it was driven by orange juice, and it almost halved the relative risk of this poor cognitive function in older age, and other juices, no significant decrease. We also know intervention studies can improve cognitive function in younger adults. So these findings are interesting, given the size of the effect size, and also given some of the mechanistic data as well. So we know that orange juice, it contains two unique flavonoids, which are polyphenols, and those flavonoids have prebiotic effects. And there are studies on 100% orange juice showing that it has a prebiotic effect. So it can change and improve the profile of the gut microbiota. We also know from mechanistic studies that these flavonoids can cross the blood-brain barrier and act as neuroprotective and anti-inflammatory agents in the brain, and also increase blood flow to the brain. So although it's just one observational study, it's exciting because there's these mechanistic reasons and this large effect size there to suggest that juice may have, particularly orange juice, an important effect in gut and brain health. Now, back to my conversation with my flatmate. I should have stopped earlier, but I kept going. He was drinking a glass of apple juice at the time, and I said, yes, not only is it bad for your health, it has all of the sugar and all of the kilojoules of 5 apples in less than a minute. And this is not true. So you may have heard this myth, but when we actually look at the numbers, it tells a different story. So the number of pieces of fruit to make juice varies, of course, based on the size of the fruit. So if you're making watermelon juice, you're going to need a lot less pieces of fruit than if you're making grape juice, of course. But if we zoom in on orange juice as an example, again, it depends on the size of the oranges that you use, but we're looking at about, on average, in general, 2.5 oranges to make 1 glass of 250 ml 100% orange juice. It would be just over 1 orange if you're making half a glass. But what's important to keep in mind is just like how some of the fiber is lost in the juicing process, well, some of the sugar is lost too. It's not this magic trick where all of the sugar is carried through into the juice and all of the fiber is lost. And when you actually do the calculations, it varies based on the brand of juice. There is a range. This is data from the Australian Food Composition Database that collates, in this analysis, they did 10 different samples, did an average, and the amount of sugars in kilojoules in 1 full glass of 100% orange juice is the equivalent to just over 1 whole orange. And again, if you're having half a glass, it'd be less than 1 whole orange. So it's not as sugar or energy dense as we may be led to believe. And finally, my flatmate, look, he loved his juice and he wasn't too happy that I was telling him how bad it was. So he actually came back at me and he said, well, you know, what's so bad about having lots of fruit in the juice? Isn't that providing important nutrients? And I came back at him and I said, well, actually, you know, there's some nutrients in there, but the sugars are a particular concern because they're free. And once we create a beverage that's high in free sugars, they all pose a negative risk to health. And I was equating it in a similar way to sugar-sweetened beverages. And given the results, so I'd believed in this up until we started looking at the data. And given the balance of evidence, it caused me to have a rethink about what this data is saying and how it might actually be having an effect. And it made me realize a couple of different concepts that we often ignore in nutrition. So the first is the concept of multiplicity, and that's the idea that there's a lot more to juice than just high sugars, low fiber. There's all these other components. So it has a micronutrient profile similar to the whole. So it's one of the richest sources of bioactives in the diet. It has a low GI, minimally processed, et cetera, et cetera. And it's interesting because there's actually now over 25,000 different components that have bioactive effects in foods, but our largest nutrition databases in the world only consistently measure about 150 of those. That's only about 0.5%. There's a lot more in foods than what we actually appreciate. The second concept is this concept of synergy. And that's the idea that these nutrients are not working, or these bioactive components are not working. They're not just sitting still in isolation, but they're actually working in synergy. And one example from juice is that the polyphenols in juice have been shown to reduce the digestion, absorption, and uptake of free sugars. So we need to think about not just what's in there, but also the effects that they're having. And these concepts of multiplicity and synergy are important because they make up a theory called complexity theory, which is used in lots of other fields in science and other fields. And I think it's something we need to embrace in nutrition more. And what complexity theory says is that there's different types of systems, and our conceptualization of those systems should change based on their complexity. So we have simple systems which have a low number of components and lower interactivity between those. And complexity theory says, okay, you can actually predict the effects of that system by looking at its individual components. But a complex system, something that has many components in it, and there's high synergy between those, something like 100% fruit juice as an example, we actually can't, according to complexity theory, accurately predict the effects by its individual components alone. So I have 3 key takeaways for 100% juice for you today. The first is that there is benefits to human health with the consumption of 100% juice. So our umbrella review, which is the most comprehensive data we have on high-level evidence for juice and health, says that there is, on balance, there is benefit to human health and limited at high-level evidence of harm. The second key takeaway is that juice is more than just 1 to 2 nutrients. So we need to create a more sophisticated conceptualization of juice than just high sugar, low fiber. And this is a learning I think we tend to get stuck in nutrition. So you think about eggs, back in the time we said it was high in cholesterol and bad for heart health. We now know it's more complex. You think about olive oil or nuts, we said it's high in calories and fats and therefore bad for your weight. We now know that there's more to it, and that's not true. more recently with dairy, full fat dairy products, we've said that they're high in saturated fat, they're bad for our heart health, and more recent research is saying that that's not accurate because of the synergistic effects between other nutrients. And the third takeaway is the importance of the wider context. So I think we love in nutrition to be the authoritative voice about whether a food's healthy or unhealthy. But of course, when we take a step back, it's all malleable and it all depends on the bigger picture. So we might say, yes, juice can contain added sugars, but we can help people to choose 100% juice. We might say, yes, well, juice can undermine whole food intake, but we can also use it as a tool to increase total food intake. We might say, well, juice is bad for dental health. We can help people in practical ways to protect their dental health and consume juice. Or we might say, well, juice is high in sugars, but of course, we can use it as a tool to help facilitate nutrient intake while watching total sugar content. And I think when we think about dietary guidelines, we look at water as a drink of choice. Water is great, but it's all based on dietary modeling that says we meet all of our nutrients through food. And that is not true. We've just done another study recently where there's 22 nutrients of concern in the Australian diet. So because we're not eating the right foods, I think we need to use beverages as a tool to help improve nutrient intake as well. So I think just with regards to the practical context, I think when we sort of look at those contextual factors as fixed, we underappreciate the potential that we can, so we sort of undermine our potential to help. And when we recognize that these contextual factors are malleable, we can increase the value that we provide to the rest of the population. So if I was to go back in time and have a conversation with my flatmate again, and he asked me what my thoughts are on juice, I would say, well, fruit juice can be a healthy option. And if you like, I can show you how. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. You've reminded me, as you always do when you speak about nutrition, that more than one thing can be true, and the power of the and in our statements that we make. Thank you for making that point so beautifully and taking us through so much complex data in such a short period of time. So we're now ready for our Q&A session, and so all the panelists will be joining for the Q&A. And please do keep your questions coming into that Q&A box, not the chat box, please. I'm not clever enough to multitask across all of them. And I'll ask as many questions as I can in the time that we have left. And Nicole Senior is now with us on camera, which is very exciting. Good to see. See, I was not lying about that beautiful face. Welcome, Nicole. Okay, so the first question, and I'll go to you for this one, Nicole, since you were talking about the guidelines, is can you just clarify for us how the guidelines for juice are different for young children than generally and for adults?
Yes, Emma. So the current Australian infant feeding guidelines actually say no juice in the first 12 months. And then it reverts to everyone else, the same as everyone else. But I know in practice that early childhood nutrition educators do say, look, when they're little, dilute the juice half and half with water. And I think that's completely fine. I did that with my own child. I think that's fair.
Awesome. Thank you. And as an adult, I still dilute my juice in water sometimes as well, because I like to spread it throughout the day. So no problems there, I don't think. Now, I think you're probably all going to have a comment on this next question, which is on the blood glucose response of 100% juice. So Nicole, do you want to go first on just commenting on what the relationship of blood glucose response 100% juice maybe versus fruit is probably what this is asking?
Yes. Well, Emma, I did actually prepare a slide, but I cut it out because I was going way over time. But what I did do is I assessed the GI of orange, apple, and mixed juices. And what I found is that all of the juices had a low GI. And it's probably going back to the fructose content as well as the polyphenol content, but they're all low GI. And when I looked at the glycemic load, or the GL, in fact, they're also low. And funnily enough, for the GL to be measured, they required a 20-gram carbohydrate portion. So the portions of juice that they used were 200 mils of apple juice, 350 mils of orange juice, and 180 mils of a mixed juice that had apple, orange, pineapple, nut, banana, and guava. So contrary to popular view, juices do not create a blood glucose spike. They're low GI and low GL.
And GI being glycemic index, if people aren't across that terminology. Anneline, I think you would have a comment on maybe the mechanisms of why that simple logic doesn't work out in juice when it comes to GI and GL.
Yeah, so this is an example of understanding mechanisms of action. And so in the case of juice, like it defies what we would think. It really does. But there's some really interesting research that is showing, okay, so why are we not getting this spike? You'd expect it. If I gave someone some glucose syrup, they have spikes, or if they gave them a white bread jam sandwich, they have a spike. And why are we not seeing this with juice? And it's partially, this is early research, guys, so don't take this and run as gospel truth. It is evolving. That's the whole point of nutrition research. It looks that it's the polyphenols, whether that be the phenolic acids, anthocyanins that are really, really, really high in juices like your grape juice and your pomegranate juice. In your orange juices, your citrus juices, there is a whole range of other phenolic acids. And these compounds, these bioactive compounds, actually seem to be having a very direct impact on blood pressure levels, the vasoconstriction in the, improving the vasoconstriction in the arteries. So they seem to be working synergistically with, if there is dietary fiber in there, they're enhancing the dietary fibers behavior. But even in juices that don't have dietary fiber, that have these high concentrations of phytonutrients, they seem to be having this contradictory behavior to free sugar. Yeah.
Which goes to your point about complexity, right, Tim? It's a perfect example there.
That's
Tim's
great.
nodding vigorously.
Sorry.
And you will find on the resources that you can access through the resource link, there is an infographic which does have some data on blood glucose and juice. Our next question, Tim, I think this is a great one for you off the back of the story you told about your flatmate. If 100% juice is going to be included as part of a healthy balanced diet or a regular diet, then how important is it to be educating people on label reading?
That's a key, one of my key recommendations. And the regulations make it hard to know what is 100% juice and what's not. And the only real way is to read the ingredients. So that's a key role that we can have as healthcare professionals to help people understand that not all juices are the same. There's some, like I said, like my flatmate, that is not even technically a fruit juice under the food standards code. It's a fruit drink. And here, the perception that it's 100% juice for it.
Yep, and I fell into that trap just last week with 5 degrees in this and was part of that paper Tim just presented. And I got home and realized, oh, I've bought a juice I did not intend to. So we all still do it. So
it's interesting because some of the juice packets will say like 100% recycled packaging on the front. So you have to really read the ingredients list to know.
Absolutely. So there's a question about, does it still count as 100% juice if it's reconstituted and has ascorbic acid added as a preservative? So Tim, I'm just going to let you answer first based on what was included in the study. And then Anneline, I'm going to come to you for a bit of a broader comment on that question, if I may.
Sounds great. So we included reconstituted juices as a 100% juice. So they were included in the data. Some of the systematic reviews did do sub-analysis or sort of reported whether the juice was reconstituted or not. And for those outcomes, there didn't seem to be a difference. So it doesn't seem that reconstituting juice suddenly makes you put on weight or doesn't have a blood-lowering potential based on the data we found. If it had anything added, including ascorbic acid, it wasn't counted as 100% juice. But whether that actually means it's less healthy or not, it may not be the case, but I guess that's what I'm about.
So reconstituted only included if it's reconstituted back to that same Brix concentration for the sugar. Awesome.
Yeah, so reconstituted is where the water is taken out and added back in. So if it was not added into the same, and the total sugar content was much higher versus amount of juice that was direct from the fruit, then we didn't count that.
Because then it's still concentrated, not reconstituted. Yes.
Yeah.
Anneline, do you want to talk a little bit about reconstitution in general and what happens there in industry?
Yeah, okay. So recon is like essentially you've juiced a whole bunch of oranges or carrots or grapes or whatever it is. And essentially the water is just evaporated out. So that could be anywhere between 70 to 90% of the water that has been removed. There's two ways of doing it. Steam evaporation. That was the first way of doing it. And it's still commonly used in a lot of different companies, but also reverse osmosis, which is like super high tech. And it's very expensive. So I'm quite intrigued that a lot of them actually are starting to include reverse osmosis. So it doesn't need as much heat. And essentially the water part is literally pushed through, and the molecules that are larger than the size of water are retained. And so the whole point of it is literally just for storage and transportation and shelf life. If we did not do concentration, we would be dumping thousands of tons of fruit all the time. So this is a way that we can process a lot of fruit and veggies and preserve it, so to speak. So then the recon process is literally to add the same amount of water back into place. Now, the reason why the food industry adds ascorbic acid is not actually for preservation, is because during either steam evaporation, or if they do the reverse osmosis, there is a little bit of heat there that can decrease the vitamin C content. So they actually have to put the vitamin C level back up to what it was originally. So the preservation content is when it's heat filled. So actually heat filling it into that bottle preserves it. And then after they've done that, then they add the Vit C to it to maintain that vitamin C level. So it's a little, if you understand the process, it's a bit of a different way of thinking about it. Yeah.
So more about enriching back to where we started than fortifying above and beyond.
Well, yeah, you got to realize like when juicing is one of the oldest things out there. We've got I think the first time we've actually got it documented on paper is the Dead Sea Scrolls of how to squeeze a fig and push it through some muslin. So juicing has been around for a long time, and the steam evaporation process that started way back in the 1940s, 1950s. So yes, they did have a look at what was destroyed, and vitamin C at that time, that's where our knowledge was the thing that was largely assessed. Looking at it now, that's why reverse osmosis has come into play to minimize the amount of heat degradation.
Wonderful. One last quick question before we run out of time. Nicole, there's a comment saying that given the low fiber intakes in the population, how do we reconcile the promotion of juice versus the promotion of fruit in terms of maybe the two things can be true and the minding the gap comes into play here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we get fiber from lots of different places and lots of different food groups. And in fact, the modern recommendations are to have a mixture of different fibers. So, the dietary guidelines still apply about ensuring that you have your 2 and 5 most of the time. You don't have to have juice every single day. To have your whole grains, to include pulses and legumes and nuts, and you're going to get loads of fiber if you follow those things. We can't rely on just fruit to get all of our fiber. So I think you can have both.
And probably not a competition between fruit and juice, probably a competition between juice and other beverages that we've already mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, well, in the interest of time, I will thank all of our panelists, and thank you to the audience for all of those wonderful questions. I think they added to the conversation beautifully. All that remains is for me to thank you on behalf of Food IQ Global. Here is where you can contact us if you would like to continue this conversation or make sure you don't miss our next webinar. And we would love to hear your feedback on today's session. And by doing so, you'll have an opportunity to win. So there's a QR code on the screen now. If you scan that, it will take you to a feedback survey where you'll have the chance to win one of 5 of the Ottolenghi Simple Cookbook. We do also have access for you today to some of our resources, including some infographics, as well as access to the full paper that Tim presented and some fact sheets, some other materials. So you can use the QR code on the right there. So go ahead and scan those now, or take a screenshot so you can scan them later. You will also get a follow-up email after the event for those who are here live, including these links. And if you're on Zoom right now, there is the resources tab right down the bottom where you can access those resources as well. So I will leave this up as we come to our 2 o'clock ending so that you have time to access. I just want to once again thank our funding partner, Hort Innovation, for supporting this webinar today. I'd like to thank all of the speakers and, of course, all of you for joining us to consider evolving perspectives on nutrition. And we hope that after the webinar, you do feel like you have a refreshed perspective on the role of 100% juice in a healthy diet. Thank you for being here.